Yeah, could you turn your names round? Because you know.
Oh, yes. Oh, sorry. I thought reminding every so often. Good shout.
Oh, right, yes,
30% of
Roland.
people think Ronald is Roland.
Yes.
I don't know if you have the reverse problem. Nobody calls you
No.
Roland's
no.
fine. You've got a proper name.
You're wrong.
Mike, that he needs to go on
I think you can't
YouTube.
They do. They do. It's Roland.
I'm limited to what I can do from my computer. The link is in the front page of the agenda. Hey, good morning, everyone. My name is Luciane Bauker, and I'm the clerk for this hearing today. I put the camera on in the room, just realized. Oh, no, it is on. I'm showing that. Okay. So we're here this morning for the review of the license for the Rewind Festival. I'm going to ask the panel to elect a chairman, please.
I elect Beth.
Nominate Beth. Okay, Beth, you've been elected chairman for this hearing today, so I'll pass it over to you.
Thank you very much. And can I say on our behalf, welcome to everyone. Some of you we know as members and some we don't. I'm going to introduce the members to you, so although you can see our names, you know who we are, and talk about what we're going to consider. Jackie, do you want to introduce yourself?
Yes, I'm Jackie Rance, Borough Councillor for Shinfield Ward.
And I'm Mike Smith, Borough Councillor for Maiden Early Ward.
And as Lucian said, we're here to look at the matter of the licence of Rewind. I'm not sure whether I'm old enough to go to Rewind.
Probably.
Mike?
Remember, everyone's there. Everyone. Remember the 80s.
Oh, yes. I can come then. I'm going to ask the subcommittee if they've got any interest to declare. Jackie? Mike?
No.
To ask the officers to confirm whether or not the formal requirements in respect of the matter to be considered have been complied with.
Yeah, I think that's for Kieran just to confirm that the requirements of notice, etc. has been, that's correct. And Chair, can I just, for the record, introduce myself as well? My name's
Yes, sorry, Neil.
My name's Neil Allen. I'm the legal advisor to the panel. If you hear me asking questions, so they're purely to assist the panel.
Okay.
Mrs. Chairwoman, can I ask you, please, to get everybody to speak loudly, because there's people with hearing aids here and they can't hear.
Including me. Yes. And can I also remind you that this is being broadcasting live. So if you don't want to be broadcast, you need to leave the room. By staying in the room, you give your consent to being broadcast. Can you all hear me?
Yes. Yes.
I'm going to outline briefly the procedure, although I know you've got paperwork and we're going to reaffirm that only information relevant to representations can be considered, and that such information must be relevant to the licensing objectives. The chairman, that's me, to confirm that all parties understand this. And the 4 licensing objectives are the prevention of crime and disorder, public safety, the prevention of public nuisance, and the protection of children from harm. Is everyone clear on that? I'm going to introduce the licensing officer who is at the end. Kieran is the licensing officer. I think many of you know him. The subcommittee may ask the licensing representative for clarification of points at any time. Okay. We're going to go through this in order, and I believe most of you have a copy of it. Okay. The subcommittee may ask the licensing team representative for clarification of any points. We are not experts in this. We have our in-house experts. The applicant and licence holder shall have the opportunity to put questions to the licensing team. And so we're going to go through that in the order that it's here so that you can see where we're going. Okay. Do you want me to read the others out for those of you that haven't? got copies. But I'm going to follow this very clearly. If I turn over, we've got an agenda here, and the agenda is to provide relevant information for the subcommittee to determine the application for review of premises licence received from Mr. Ron Emerson on behalf of Remenham Farm Residents Association. This relates to the premises licence PR 0462 for Rewind Festival, Temple Island, River Thames, Remenham. Okay, can we start? Is everyone happy?
Thank you, Chair. I think in accordance with Section 52 of the Licence Act 2003, members are requested to determine the application for review having regard to the review application, representations that have been received, and the requirements to promote the 4 licensing objectives. Section 51 of the Licensing Act provides for a responsible authority or any other person to apply to the licensing authority for the review of a premises licence, as is the case here. Before determining the application, the authority must hold a hearing, which we have now, and that's to consider any of the relevant representation, take steps as it considers necessary for the promotion of the licensing objectives. The options that are available to the subcommittee are to modify the conditions of the licence, to exclude a licensable activity from the scope of the licence, to remove the designated premises supervisor, an area not exceeding 3 months, to revoke the licence, issue a formal warning to the DPS or licence holder, or take no action, no further action. And as you've highlighted in your opening, Chair, we need to take into account the four licensing objectives in determining this application. In terms of the background, the premises to which the licence relates is Rewind Festival, and that's at Temple Island by the River Thames in Remenham. The licence authorises plays, films, live music, recorded music, performance of dance, other entertainment similar to live and recorded music, dance performance, late night refreshment, and the supply of alcohol. The permitted hours for licensable activities are generally between 11 AM and 1 AM on Friday, Saturday, and Sunday, with detail given on the licence that's provided at Appendix A. The premises licence holder is Rewind Festival Limited, and the DPS is Mr. Benjamin Turnbull. The application for review was received by the licensing authority for Mr. Ron Emerson on behalf of Remenham Farm Residents Association, 6th March 2023. And that review application states that all licensing objectives are being undermined. The full details of the review with supporting information are set out within that application. They're attached as Appendix B and Appendix C, with supporting photographs, videos, and evidence that can be found in the remaining appendices. A 28-day consultation period ran from the 7th of March 2023 to the 3rd of April 2023. The responsible authorities and ward members were notified by email of the application. Site notices were put up. Representation was received from one other person supporting the review and the grounds set out, and the consultation also included a representation from Mr. John Househall and also from Mr. Neil Brown, and that representation is attached as Appendix I. As part of the consultation period, a mediation meeting was hosted and it was held at the council offices on the 12th of April with representatives from Rewind Festival and the Residents Association. During the mediation, the following actions were identified for Rewind Festival to consider and to respond to, and we've had responses back for those bullet points relating to a traffic management plan, event safety management plan, latest sustainability report, and involvement in forward planning and noise around vehicle movement itself. That's also been circulated outside of the reports that the members make. I'm happy to take any questions in terms of the consultation. Yeah, but that concludes at the outset of the report.
Okay, are there any questions for the officer? Thank you, Leo.
Ma'am, yes, thank you very much. Kieran, could you please explain what a SAG is, who convenes it, how it's convened, and who are the usual participants, please?
Yeah. A SAG stands for Safety Advisory Group. The local authority, we host the Safety Advisory Group and we'll chair those Safety Advisory Group meetings. It is advisory, it's not a statutory provision. However, the responsible authorities that attend the Safety Advisory Group meetings, they'll be lead agencies, lead partners. So the likes of the police, fire service, ambulance service, and then we'll have internal sort of council departments. There'll be such as emergency planning, licensing, health and safety, food safety, and noise pollution control. So it's quite a wide and well attended safety advisory group. We host a safety advisory group for a number of events. It's not just Rewind Festival. Around the Remenham site, there's a collective of events with the Henley Royal Regatta, a number of other rowing events, half marathons that take place within the borough as well, and other festivals that take place at site. The largest safety advisory group we run in this local authority is for the Henley Royal Regatta. But of course, for the Rewind Festival, is quite a well attended festival, and we have a specific SAG set up for Rewind too.
And obviously there's a sort of a wide list. Here in the borough, you also traditionally have had participation from civil society, haven't you? So the leader of the council, a local councillor, and representatives of civil society are part of your SAG, aren't they?
We have had a councillor attend one of the safety advisory group meetings for Henley Royal Regatta. That's correct. But generally, the safety advisory groups are attended by the licence holders and licensees themselves, and then also the actual event organisers themselves, and then also the statutory authorities. In terms of Workington Borough Council's approach, it would more be leaning towards keeping the safety advisory group meetings as they stand in terms of the invitees. For those that are attending to it, this is completely voluntary. It's a completely voluntary format, and ultimately the viewpoint perspective of those license holders would be given the status that it deserves, because ultimately it is a voluntary and advisory role, not a statutory one.
That's very helpful, thank you.
Thank you, you're welcome. The chairman will invite the applicant to make any representation.
Chair, sorry. Sorry, I just one question, if Mr. Hinchcliffe, if you don't mind, just to make it clear to the committee members that the consultation period for the review ended on the 3rd of April, but then you referred to 2 representations which were received on the 5th of April.
That's correct.
And you've summarised those. They were, in fact, outside the time period. Just to make that point. Thank you.
They simply support the review.
Yeah.
Oh, they don't have any?
I don't think they add anything further. I think Mr. Brown's comments has been remediated.
Well, I think on the legal status is that they're not relevant representations. However, what they speak to is the involvement of Mr. Brown. Mr. Brown will see as part of the association that's made the application in any event. So what that counts is as amplification in any event. And then the rep of the parish council, the chairman of which is here, is also along. And of course, under the hearings regs, we're entitled to bring persons to support our applications to amplify. So the neat legal solution is to include them as witnesses, and permission to include those witnesses should not generally be withheld. So I don't think there's any legal issues with having them here, or indeed inviting them to contribute.
Yes, and nor do I take exception to them, but I think it's always important to establish what was the representation within the timetable and what wasn't. And it's quite correct that we were engaging with Mr. I do beg your pardon, Mr. Neil Brown at the mediation meeting on the specific point that he raised.
Yeah, thank you.
Chair, just that's a sensible one ahead. Do you have any questions for
Mike, do you have questions?
Yes, you mentioned the representation by Mr. Horsall's writing on behalf of the parish council. As I understand it, John was neither chair nor clerk at the time. So what basis is that, mate?
I'm the deputy chairman and the ex-chairman. I was chairman for 25 years, which is enough really, Mike. Thank you.
Just I'm not sure whether Kieran can answer that because you're asking something about.
What was the basis of representation?
Yeah. Okay. Well,
And quite easily, I'm just calling the chair of the parish council as a witness. So
Yes,
the representation, in effect, or the letter or the email and its status can be put to one side. But I think the question is quite legitimate. But just treat him as a witness.
Thank you.
Okay. Jackie, do you have any questions?
now I've got one question for Kieran. It's about the SAG. Who decides who's on and off the SAG?
It would be local authority. It would be ourselves.
Okay, so and the license holder, do they have any ability to say who's on or off?
Because it's voluntary and not statutory. They would have a say.
Yeah. So could they object to someone else? Could for example, who actually decides who's in the room?
So for the Henley Royal Regatta, we sometimes get requests to not share event safety plans wider than the responsible authorities themselves. So they do have a say, and with the fact that it's their data and sensitive, we would have to respect circulated wider. So we are tied through that, fully voluntary, and obviously there are potential issues with.
Yeah. So in short, what you're saying is up to everyone who is around that table, whether they are there or not.
Yeah, the whole concept of the safety advisory group is soft skills and working with event organisers and responsible authorities to try and shape and steer into putting on safe events. So we look at best practices, we look at purple guides. And we look to try and shape medical resources and security provisions and different licensing requirements as and when they come up, and then we also run noise monitoring through for Rewind Festival. There'll be noise monitoring taking place. So that's the concept of how the SAGs will work.
Okay, thank you, Kieran.
Mike, would you like to follow on the question?
Yes, sorry, just to follow that on. So are all members of the SAG, they all have some professional or relevant safety expertise to share for the group? Yeah, so they'll effectively be the lead officers within their field. So could be different ranks. From the police, we'll have a lead officer from the transport section. We'll also have a licensing officer from the police. We'll have an actual event operations manager or operations officer from the police, we have emergency planning, and then we'll have we may have an inspector or sergeant depending on the nature of the event. And then across the board you'll then have your lead officers, so it'll be the service managers. So its sole focus is safety? Absolutely, yeah.
Okay, let's move on to the next one. I'd like to invite the applicant to make any representations.
Ma'am, thank you very much. Good morning to all. Huge thank you to Kieran for organising the mediation meeting last week. That was very helpful, and it reminds me what the purpose of reviews are. Reviews are described in the Section 182 guidance, to which you must have regard, as a key protection for the local community. Decisions that you make must be made in the interests of the wider public interest. And even though there's no allegation of crime against Rewind Festival, in the section under crime, it says when you make decisions for the local community and not the narrow interests of the operator. View is not necessarily a failure. In many respects, it's an audit. What's working, what's not working, what can be improved. And so we don't necessarily see that as a bad mark against the premises license holder, that they need a review. I often feel, despite being a lawyer, when I sit here in a licensing capacity, what I'm really doing is acting somewhat like a relate counsellor. I'm trying to bring parties that are not speaking to speak with each other, to cooperate. And of course, from your perspective, you of course are making decisions in the local interest. And so that local voice is, in my submission, of paramount importance. I know you don't get many reviews or licensing hearings here in Wokingham, but I will remind you of paragraph 1.5 of the section 182 guidance. That says that there are other aims and objectives which are of particular importance when exercising licensing functions. And we're all, those of us that are licensing geeks are certainly familiar in that. And they should be principal aims for everyone involved in licensing. They include protecting the public and local residents from crime, antisocial behaviour and noise nuisance caused by irresponsible licensed premises. And then as you work through, it's about providing a regulatory framework which reflects the needs of local communities and empowers local authorities to make and enforce decisions about the most appropriate licensing strategies for their local area, and encourage greater community involvement in licensing decisions and giving local residents the opportunity to have their say regarding licensing decisions that may affect them. So those are two key bullet points, and you see them replicated in statement of licensing policies up and down the country. So what we're doing here is saying that as a result of this premises license, representatives from the local community are engaging with their elected representatives in order to determine the most appropriate licensing strategies for this particular area. Read into that the most appropriate licensing conditions for our local area, and giving us the opportunity to have our say regarding licensing decisions that affect us. It's very interesting, Mum. At the outset, you said, well, we've got our licensing officer because we're not experts. And that's great. What you are experts in is as representatives from the local community, despite the fact that the SAG and the licensing regime involve the police, health and safety, noise, and what have you. All of these expertise, at the pinnacle of all of that, the key decision maker isn't some expert. It's you, local people representing other local people, determining where the balance lies. And so when I hear that the licensing authority is the host, our officials that serve our community get together an invite list and say, we are putting together a SAG which is about the community impact of a festival which over the weekend has 40,000 people swamping your local community, having an impact. And the reason we've picked Rewind to review is from May to September, every single weekend, there are licensed events in this community, and Rewind is the largest of those. This community bears the impact of that. The Rewind operators have changed hands multiple times. We, the residents, have not. We have a body of experience going back 14 years. And so when Kieran says to me, we only invite the relevant experts who have expertise to participate in the SAG, to give us their opinion, to give us their advice, to share their experience, I have to knock at his door and say, we've been there for 14 years. We live this festival. We're the ones who are locked in our homes because our cars cannot get out. We are the ones that have to seal our windows. I'm sure my friend won't mind me saying, switch off our hearing aids and still get disturbed by the noise. To be told our expertise is of no value, of no relevance, is, to be quite frank, coming from an officer of the council, a little bit insulting. Not just to us, but to you. Because at the pinnacle of decision making, it's you, local people, and the electorate that are valuable. Not just that, but our involvement is a principal aim, and they are vitally important, says the Section 182 guidance issued by the Home Office, for everyone involved in licensing work. So why does Kieran, I'm sorry to pick on you, Kieran, but you're at the head of the table and speaking, why does the licensing authority exclude those of us that want to become empowered to develop the most appropriate licensing strategies in our local area? Why are we being denied the opportunity to have a say in licensing decisions? If you look at page 17 of your bundle, you'll see there page 6 of the premises license. This is a very dense and not easily read document. But near the top, under condition 4, the organizer will give at least 6 months prior notice of the dates. I don't know if you see that. It's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 lines down. The West Berkshire, Wokingham Shared Services, Thames Valley Police, the Events Planning Officer, Events Planning Management, Fire Safety Team, and so on, as well as the SAG, and local residents has already been agreed. But we're already engaged. So it seems to me a very small step and a very small ask, given the clear policy considerations, to say, we who live this event, suffer this event, and are most impacted by this event, might have some useful experience to share. After all, it's voluntary. It's about sharing information. What's wrong with that? And in the course of my presentation to you, I will call on a couple of the members, and you will see the quality of the way in which they speak to the problems and the issues identified, and the experience that they can bring. After all, given that it's voluntary, you'd have thought that casting your net for effective consultation would be useful. When your own statement of licensing policy it's really at the end of its shelf life now, and you'll no doubt soon be going out to consultation. One of the key people that you consult with are local businesses and local people that live in the area. So if they can inform your policy, why can't they inform the SAGs on a local or wider level? It seems so odd to exclude civil society from this process. And all we're asking for is that our voice be added to this invite. Surely there's room round the council tables for a member from civil society to participate in the SAG. The impact is entirely voluntary. And what harm will there be in having an additional voice, an additional perspective, and additional evidence in the process? And it may well be in the course of this discussion, which is led by you, you might ask Kieran, what harm is there in engaging with civil society? After all, we consult with them for our statement of licensing policy. After all, of the 5 bullet-pointed principal aims, 2 are about engagement. Why are we shunning this level of experience? And so what I'm asking for is not particularly radical. It's not particularly contentious. It's just saying, give us a voice. And I'm going to suggest a compromise. It may well be felt that having the representatives of the Residents Association, it might be too close. I've volunteered Bill. He is the chair. Yep, thank you. He is the chair of the parish council. I have duties to represent the local community, to engage with the council, with other authorities. They are used to drawing together disparate views and opinions, highlighting relevant people and engagement. It's a trusted position, and it's a more neutral position. So it's one step removed from the residents, but provides a bridge for these residents, for other residents, the village, and indeed the festival. So I'm not asking for anything particularly novel. I'm actually asking for exactly what is required. And I know that Mr. Rowland has agreed to take on this task. So from 6 months before, every time there's a meeting, every time there's engagement, invite a representative from civil society to engage in that process. Next thing we're looking at is it is recognised that there is one road leading into this village, and every weekend, either because of a build or an event or a break, that road is being used by festival goers and other events. Very helpfully, the representative of the festival has provided me with their draft management plan for traffic management. Concern with any condition is the way it's implemented. You know, we can all make lots of promises about, well, we'll have tabards and we'll have stewards and there'll be one ways and there'll be partners on the horns, but unless it's implemented, it will have little or no effect. And shortly, I'll ask 3 of my clients to address you. We note that the current event management plan is with a firm known as Chevron. We know the council favour Balfour Beatty, which is whom we would prefer as well. But the important thing to bear in mind is about the management of this impact. Because what we say, and the photos attest to that, is that it just doesn't work. It's not being managed properly. So what we need is, firstly, a proper plan that can be implemented based on proper information. And there's a lot to be said for external traffic managers coming in and looking at the site and the boundaries and the widths of the road and the heights of trees and bridges and positioning of light traffic lights, etc. But it's equally valuable to hear the experience of the people that live there, which is why we've asked for a number of things. Firstly, a dedicated management company as a minimum, but then we've asked for there to be an annual survey of those traffic impacts arising from the build, the operation, and the breakdown. That's important because how else do we know how have the operators kept to their commitment? A festival like this is very difficult. In fact, the licensing regime is very poorly suited to something like this. As we've seen with the SAG, it depends on trust. They make these promises about the 40,000 people and their cars and their campers and the trucks and the builds and the limousines and the VIPs. But unless these promises are met, they're not going to promote the licensing objective. The SAG itself, imagine the safety of 40,000 people and the management of the event, everything from first aid through to pyrotechnics, hinges on a voluntary meeting that can't be enforced. It hinges on trust and engagement that can't be enforced. And at the end of the day, it requires sign-off from the licensing authority. There is so much trust placed in these operators who quite naturally, and I'm not criticizing them, are of course motivated by putting on their event, giving people a good time, giving people value for money, making sure that there's a marshal or two at the appropriate junction, directing those trucks when you've got the people at the bar screaming, "We're out of ice, the generator is down, the mics are down, celebrity only needs bottled water." I don't know if Prince Andrew attends, but whoever it may be. And dealing with those needs, you can well see where those pressures are. And it's in the testing of those that we can ascertain whether or not the impacts have been met. And you, more importantly, can know, has your trust in the license holder been met? And so the idea of having their traffic consultant provide you with an impact report before, during, and after to see whether they've met their commitments is no big ask, given the amount of trust that we choose to place with them. Asking them to consult with the local residents as part of that assessment to say, Bill, Ron, Neil, how was it for you and your families? Could you get out? Was the traffic marshal responding? What were the impacts? Is no big ask, given that from May to September, you as a local authority, not you personally, but corporately, have said to this village and this area, you know what, we're going to give you a festival and events of national significance pretty much every weekend from May to September. So asking for a little bit of a review and an audit is no great thing, and making sure that the traffic management plan, the traffic orders are ready 3 months before, and then a review, say 6 weeks afterwards, is no great ask. And I note that as a result of the mediation, Mr. Cryer, on behalf of the applicant, has agreed that there will be a qualified member of the Chevron staff to be present at the entrance to Renmingham Lane at all times during the festival, to include build and break. I'd question whether one member of staff is sufficient. I think they need to be clearly identifiable. It's normally by high-vis jackets and so on. But having them there it is a step in the right direction. My clients have looked briefly at the draft report. They've some comments on the signage and the traffic lights and the importance of the people on the lane. And so very briefly, I'm just going to start with Mr. Emerson to just highlight the key traffic concerns based on your experience and your perspective and the asks that you would like to see. And perhaps the exercise could be, in many respects,
that is
Yeah.
back up and running here. Though.
Right. Go back onto the Teams call quickly. That's fine. Okay. Right. What did we do before we had it?
It's an answer to that.
Yeah. I sent a book to a friend of mine in Canada. Technologies. Right.
That's it. Should be all good. I'll double check when I'm upstairs. But you should be.
So
Just so everyone know, we're back on now.
So I just I don't need to unmute my microphone on Teams.
Done it.
It's just
I've done it for
it's
you.
okay. Apologies.
Sorry, Chair.
Are we okay now?
We're okay now.
Sorry, Leo, yes, you were in the mid-sentence.
I think I was taking a break, no doubt welcomed by everyone. And I was asking Mr. Emerson to briefly share his traffic perspective with the committee.
Thank you. A little bit more context for which this is relevant here. It's Leo talked about weekend disruption. This is much more. Over the years, and particularly in recent years, Henley Town has effectively appropriated Remenham Parish and thereby Woking Borough as its entertainment park. In the last 2 years alone, there have actually been 325 days of events. And that's the event time and the setup and take-down time. And it's that causes the disruption and public nuisance. But in fact, it goes further than that. It's odd and ironical in a way, but all of these events have got Henley labels on. Not one of them is in Henley Town. They get all the benefit economically. We get all the costs and disruption here in this borough. The fact we're having this meeting in itself. So it's throughout the summer, pretty well all days, and during the events themselves, sometimes it's much easier, but setting up and take down. And in Rewind's case, as we mentioned in the submission, the scale of the vehicles is enormous. 2 gigantic cranes have to come along there, but others too. And it's not in here inevitably, but we sent a video clip of 2 lorries, articulate, passing each other. They just happened by coincidence to be passing in front of Remenham Church. It's the only place on that lane where they could have passed. One of them wasn't just gigantic, it had an equally long loose trailer behind it, impossible to reverse up or turn around. And that's what happened on the day after the event. So it was takedown time. The traffic management plan was abandoned, and there is no other word for it. It was abandoned. All of the traffic signs in the surrounding roads that would have guided these trucks were removed. They were completely removed. The marshalling was removed. Now, the marshalling was totally ineffective anyway, because, for example, one of the car parks at the end of Remenham Lane to prevent trucks coming along, 2 men sitting inside it were allowing trucks to come along. And I said, well, why are you doing this? And they said, well, we don't have the power to stop them. So, utterly useless. Neil Brown found one of them asleep. Total waste of time. But that day, because of this, Remenham Lane was blocked for the 1 mile length from Remenham Church to Henley Bridge. Totally impossible. If a house had caught fire on Remenham Lane or someone had a heart attack, no emergency services could have got to it. This isn't just public nuisance. And by the way, it's not just community. These are public roads used by everyone throughout the day. This is dangerous. It's seriously dangerous. And it's beyond belief that it could have been allowed to happen. But in our view, it showed something of an attitude of the community doesn't matter. We just want to get this whole thing taken down. We've had the event. It works better in the week leading up to the event, presumably because it has to work, because otherwise there's no event. But once it's done, then we had chaos. So it is the scale of this on what are 8-foot wide single track country roads for what, as I said, has been 325 days. But within it, this has been our biggest concern.
Thank you. That's really useful. And Mr. Bishop, O'Neill, do you want to say? Thank you.
Madam Chair, thank you for the chance to speak today. I was here the first time that the license was applied for at Woking, and so I understand the relationship between what a license permits and behaviour that happens and what's enforceable. And my experience, because I live in a house at the junction of Lane and Church Lane, directly overlooking the site, is to compare the events that are authorised by you. So for the Royal Regatta Morning Stream, we have an experience of highly proficient traffic marshals backed up by the police who absolutely know what to do all the time, and it works generally like clockwork on a massive scale. At the other end of the scale, the Women's Regatta, which is a much, much smaller affair, has been able to produce marshals who were volunteers from a rowing club, so no real training. And over the course of their regatta weekend, when they had it done in the village during COVID, they managed to traffic superbly. And they did it because they took no nonsense from drivers. They overlooked the fact that they didn't have legal authority or police backing, and they took their responsibilities to the village seriously. And I'm afraid what we've found with the marshals employed by Rewind is that although they're professionals, they're not nearly as proficient as these volunteer women from Henley Rowing Club. And so what we have found is that when we speak to the marshals from all three types of events, because we go and chat with them, we have cups of tea in their leisure days, what we have found is that the ones associated with the Rewind Festival, and especially unfortunately on the current ownership, don't know the traffic plan, don't know, are not able to proficiently manage the signs to show which direction traffic should be in at different times, and even have been found to be asleep during the working day, but not in the night. So that's one factor, and that's why we're keen to have marshals there who are proficient. That's the first thing, and also that they're there at the right times. Because the second thing is, I think you should think of Rewind in three phases. The traffic is managed best during the festival itself, because the organisers understandably want to get their customers on and off, and that works reasonably well. Second best is in the build-up, because of the sheer scale of traffic and equipment that's being brought onto the site. And after the event, I can't find a polite way of describing it. I mean, you know what events are like. The minute it's over, a volunteer event, everybody goes and leaves a mess. And effectively, that's what happens. Rewind finishes, the customers go, the marshals go. And so for a week, this huge scale event is basically, it's chaos. It's absolute chaos. And the distinction between that and the regatta is important. The Royal Regatta is on a site close to Henley Bridge, so the heaviest vehicles can get off on main roads. They don't use the single track lanes. The regatta owns a lot of its heavy equipment, so it stays on the site all year round. And the building of the regatta starts after Easter, you'll see it if you drive through Henley, and takes weeks afterwards. So the distinction between it and Rewind is this. Rewind is on a massive scale, but on the end of single track lanes. And Rewind is built and taken down in only a week, so the intensity of that massive operation is extraordinary. And therefore, the requirement for proficient marshalling and marshalling for the whole of the relevant period is absolutely key. Thank you.
Okay, thank you.
I don't know if you have anything to add. Do you want to? It might not.
Yes, good morning. I've been the ward councillor here for 12 years, I think, and parish council chairman for 25 years. And I've lived in the area, the centre of the battleground, so to speak, for 45 years. So I've had a long history of this. When I moved to Remenham, Henley Regatta was 4 days, and it didn't even come to my house, which is halfway down the course. Ron, Mr. Emerson, has explained that now the whole of the summer, from May to April and beyond, is happening with the euphemism of Henley. But actually, they're all Remenham Borough. Working Borough residents and businesses make no profit out of them at all, and the borough doesn't derive any benefit in terms of rates because it's all agricultural land, and has a lot of disbenefits. It has to support at its cost these activities, even these activities in terms of roads. The roads have to be repaired pretty frequently, and they're all country lanes, and that comes out of the borough coffers, which could be used elsewhere. I'm delighted that licensing is now back with the borough, and the borough is able to take a close interest in what's going on in this patch. In terms of Rewind, I think the pitch has been covered. But we're not asking for a lot. We're really asking for representation in committee, which is the SAG. There is no other body which does the planning, and that representation should have access to data in order to make that representation sensible. The SAG needs to represent not only the event, but also the residents, but also the other people who use the area, like the rowers, the sports, the dog walkers, Women's Institute, the church, all of whom have to shut down for events. So the SAG should be representative, and it's quite right that the parish council should, chairman should be on it, or his nominee or her nominee, depending on time. Traffic plan is a bugbear. It is country lanes. Country lanes are only just wider than my car. So huge pantechnicons going down country lanes are a problem and need to be managed. And any traffic plan, incompetently managed, however good traffic plan, is not going to work. And that's really what we're facing. So it needs to be managed in the interests of all the stakeholders, the event, the residents, the Women's Institute, the church, and all the other stakeholders. And lastly, I have, over 25 years, succeeded in eliminating reversing horns, which drive people mad. On all events, apart from this one. There's no other event in the panoply of events which occur which have reversing horns. They all are white noise or stewarded vehicles. So it's not unreasonable to ask for that the condition to be put in. Thank you very much, Shane.
Thank you very much. So you'll see there just this awareness of the event, participation in the event. And in fact, I challenge Kieran to find an officer that spends more time with the marshals than our residents do, or an officer that has more experience of viewing the road, engaging with the people, trying to find constructive solutions and analysing it. So, and, you know, if the local authority wants 3 advisors, consultees, wisdom and experience to draw on, we're here willing to give up our time to do that. And you've also seen the very balanced way in which the evidence has been presented to you. Before I get on to the environmental impact, I will just deal with reversing horns. Page 20 of your pack. You'll see page 9 of the premises license. So if you look at protection from children from harm and go 1, 2, 3, 4, 17 lines, yes. We'll see white noise beepers shall be used on plants operating less than 150 metres from the boundary of residential properties. Mr. Cryer has kindly agreed that that can be amended to 100 metres. And all we suggest is white noise beepers will be used on plant and vehicles. Not asking for a lot. As you've heard from one of your colleagues and a local resident, this is what's included in other premises licenses. It represents modern practice, it represents good practice. That's the kind of thing that the SAG look at, that we're asking you to implement. And certainly at the mediation meeting, my takeaway was that was agreeable. Mr. Brown, is that your impression as well?
To
Please, just on the white noise, if you would, yes.
Thank you for indulging me again. Because of where we live, we not only have first-hand experience of Rewind, which is adjacent to the other events that happen. So over the last 14 years, all of the other events, and some of them are quite large scale. So leaving aside the regatta enclosure stuff, during Royal Regatta, fun fairs, double-decker porta cabins, China White nightclubs, all happen in the immediate vicinity. And the building and taking down of those does not involve reversing homes. So that as John suggested, is because of our engagement with other people who conduct activities over the years. Also, during the few years of the sort of interregnum when there was other management of this festival, and that was a group which did liaise with us, and we had regular meetings, we had points of contacts, we engaged in this issue, huge progress was made. So here's what happened. In 2021, the reversing horns basically operate 2 fields away from my home for 2 weeks. 2 weeks from early morning till late in the evening on a summer's evening. And even at the end of main stage performances, the reversing horns start and go until 2 in the morning. So what I'm able to tell you is that for pretty much 2 weeks, the reversing horns are audible throughout our home and the neighbouring homes the whole time. In 2021, when we contacted the organisers during the festival, the answer we got was, this is a COVID issue. It's because of the shortage of vehicles with white noise horns as a result of COVID. A year later, when we had the same problem, the excuse that wasn't rolled out as an excuse, inevitably, but the answer was, we're staying within the permitted limits. So I went and checked, because for 2 weeks we have all this building and taking down happening, and much of the activity was happening outside the permitted limit. Some of it wasn't, but even that activity outside the permitted limit was audible in our home, throughout our home, with windows closed for 2 weeks. So it seems to me not unreasonable to say that because others operating events on the same sort of scale have been able to stop this, that in fact it should be quite possible in this case to stop it. The impact on the neighbours, the impact on wildlife, the impact on the people using the Thames path for 2 weeks, it's simply unnecessary.
Oh, thank you. And that really brings me to my final point, environmental impact assessment. Licensing is very dynamic. It's always changing. And if you think about the licensing objectives, the test is to promote the prevention of public nuisance, promote the prevention of crime, promote public safety. 5 years ago, who'd have thought, certainly not necessarily in this licensing committee, but the amount of time I've spent talking about bathroom gas canisters. It moves, it develops, or indeed the amount of time I now spend dealing with single-use plastics, the extent to which we must have recyclables, dealing with salt sachets. I could give you a whole spiel about McDonald's straws, if you like. There are clients. But what we do is we develop better practice. We continue to grow and we continue to learn. And we do so both in the context of our licensing policy, but also in terms of our wider policies. We now recognise, perhaps more forcefully than ever, that safeguarding, vulnerability, diversity, inclusion, women's safety are paramount considerations. They might not be in the premises licence, but you'd be hard pressed to find a festival which doesn't include safeguarding, welfare, and so on. And so when we look at festivals like this, which happen within our natural open landscape, it is entirely legitimate and appropriate to think about their environmental impact, now more so than ever. You as a council have a climate emergency policy where you ask that all events in your borough have a calculated carbon footprint assessment. You are alive to the environmental impacts, because the environmental impacts are part of public nuisance. Whether it's a small thing like a reversing horns or the white noise or the single-use plastics or the impact on lights, pyrotechnics have on the breeding habits of bats, wildlife. That is an offence under the Wildlife and Countryside Act. That engages crime and disorder. There's not a well-known case, again, if you're a licensing geek, there was a 5-day appeal in the Wirral involving a number of silks dealing with nesting barn owls in a pub and the impact it might have. All legitimate concerns. There are conditions on premises license changing the halogens used. Bats, for example, feed at night according to a particular light spectrum. If you change the light spectrum, you'll change their feeding habits. If you leave litter in the waterways and so on, they will have an impact. And very helpfully, Rewind has supplied me with the sustainability assessment for all the Rewind festivals. There's one in Scotland, the north, and this in the south. Alarmingly, from the point of view of your climate emergency policy, they tell us that all Rewind festivals are powered by fuel combustion generators. There was no biofuel used, for example, in the Rewind festivals in 2022. And in the north, there was an increase of 24% insofar as the carbon footprint is concerned. Here in the south, it was 12%. So why do you have a policy? You have a policy to be acted on. So when we say we would like an environmental impact assessment, we're really just engaging with the better, and even better practice of running these large-scale events. Because as the sustainability report itself recognises, when its caterers say it's all recyclable, and then the smoothie van actually uses plastics, to draw one example, or sometimes the best is that it's sort of the enemy of the good. As a result of COVID, we all now have sachets, don't we? We no longer have a salt cellar, we now have got sachets. So that increases litter. And it may well be that there's one legitimate aim. You know, it's almost like tackling one fire only to deal with another. But recognizing that these create impacts that need to be assessed, not just as a result of the carbon footprint, but as the wider environmental impact assessment, is a crucial consideration in the way we operate, particularly large festivals such as this within our natural and open environment. So we're not asking for anything novel, we're not asking for anything unique, and in fact, already they have a dedicated person on their sustainable impact, employed by Live Nation. We have her email and contact number. She engages with monthly sustainability meetings to include everyone from suppliers, power, waste and mileage and so on. There's a section on local impacts, including the impacts on the rivers through to homelessness and so on. So asking for an environmental impact assessment of this actual festival on an annual basis to inform the SAG, the local committee, and you, the council, is not unreasonable. It's very much in keeping with our developing understanding of the licensing objectives. So, Mum, as I said at the outset, this is a discussion led by you. We're not some NIMBYs with our pitchforks that are saying close this down. And can I say, having spent, I think, over a year working together, if not longer, there's a wealth of evidence that could be brought to you arguing that this festival, amongst others, could and should be closed down.
Sorry.
What they're actually asking for.
I'm sorry, can I interrupt? I didn't really wish to interrupt, but it's not right in a review application where conditions are being asked for to refer to the fact that there's a wealth of evidence that would have justified a revocation, or if that's what's been suggested, or suspension. And I've had absolutely no notice of that, and nor does it form part of the case that's been presented to this committee, both in the application and the evidence we've heard so far.
I agree with that. So yeah,
all of your powers are available to you.
that we
What I'm
haven't
saying
spoken about
is-
revoking the.
What I'm saying is, my clients have judicially considered the evidence and thought about how they can engage in partnership. They've set aside those extreme options, and that speaks to their competence, their fairness, and their interests in partnership. What they're saying is, we want to be part of the conversation and are effectively inviting you to do that. And you can do that in the three ways that we've outlined. One, involve us in the SAG. Two, involve us in the traffic management, which is inevitably part of the SAG, by ensuring that there are surveys afterwards. And three, engaging in the environmental impact assessment, which is a legitimate part of the process. And of course, there is the narrow issue of the white noise, which can be amended by way of a condition.
Sorry if I could just add one point on engagement, though, to provide a little more background for you. And communication in general, we've talked about it in the context of SAG. The current owners set up this festival many years ago, and we had similar traffic problems. It passed to different ownership after that, and things changed. And one particular aspect of that was they were very proactive. And so they organized meetings with the local community in the village hall to discuss it before the festival. And then they'd organize a meeting after the festival to do a debrief. Very clear willingness to engage. There has never been any engagement of that sort. And that also needs to be addressed as part of this engagement issue.
And that problem, Ma'am, is answered by the imposition of the conditions that we're asking for. Because it's one thing to rely on the voluntary engagement, but putting these conditions in place means that whoever is operating this festival now or in the future has a clear guidelines. So we open that up for discussion. We've already started the discussion, and we've had some very helpful concessions by the operator. You can see we've not asked for the moon.
So can you finish? I have one question.
Can we stick to our agenda? And I will bring you actually. Yeah, we'll stick to our agenda. We're going to have
maybe I'll just check as part of the residency. Let me just check with.
It's relevant to.
Sorry.
What the other saying at the moment. This here. We shall produce a data.
Yeah. Sad because the top.
It says in here.
One of the clients is just pointing out the noise report. But what I say to him and to you, Mum, is that there is so much that's going on here. For example, waste. There's a condition that says there'll be a waste management plan and a cleanup, and that'll inform part of the SAG. Now, we will know whether people throw things out their window, whether they use black bin bags or not. And so in order to make sure that there is that conversation about all the issues that arise, and you'll see on page 17, there's a non-exhaustive list of some 31 headings, some of which can engage residents, some of which engage the police, some do not. But making sure that there is a forum at which residents must be present means that everything from noise through to litter, through to the environment can be properly engaged with. So as I say, I offer these up. I would say they're very reasonable matters that can be put as conditions to the premises license. And what we really hope for is that the open-mindedness demonstrated at the mediation hearing could be just encouraged that little bit more to have the festival agree to the very simple suggestions that I have made, and we can avoid the need for lawyers to get adversarial. I hope that's helped. Any questions that you have, or indeed Rewind have, I'm happy to answer either through me or through any of my clients. Thank you.
I'm going to ask the subcommittee now if they have any questions for you.
We haven't had the other side, so I want.
No, it's time for questions to the applicant.
Well, I have a couple. It's been going on for 14 years. A festival has occurred for 14 years, is that right? every year.
barring 1 year when there was a pandemic.
Sure. No offence meant, but how do you get paid by Rewind for your properties being disrupted? Is there a fee? No. Okay, thank you.
Mike, any questions?
Yeah, you made right at the beginning of your address to us some comments about the wider context, and I understand you quoted some places, but my understanding is that that's not the issue.
Well, no,
That's
Chair.
not an issue.
Chair, no, I think Mr. Gerald Lamberty's opening that I sort of dispute. I think he mentioned public interest. It rightly says community interest. There's nothing that I think is legally controversial that I've heard.
You also made a case for an environmental impact assessment. Whilst I don't disagree that an environmental impact assessment for this event would be a good thing, again, this is not a licensing matter, it's probably a planning matter.
No, Chair, again, my advice would be it could be a licensing matter. I think the climate emergency what it can do is it can come under the public nuisance objective. That's what Mr. Chair Lamberty was referring to. So I think again that's within your consideration, but of course may not be your ultimate decision, but certainly say you can consider.
Kevin, did you want to say anything there?
Just if you think about the perspective of environment, there are environmental factors that exist within licensing. So noise, light.
You speak up a bit, please.
Yes. So noise factors, light factors, sound factors. Through the SAG meetings, we're talking about waste and recycling. So there's quite a wide range of factors that are covered. And whilst it might not drill down specifically into a box, the wider remits with the size of the event do correlate to a certain extent. There is a balance here in terms of the climate emergency, and perhaps that is tremendously far, but also relevant for what the council wants to achieve. So there is sense being had, but certainly within just the premises license, pollution, light, waste, they're certainly factors for the Licensing Act.
And Mark, paragraph 14.63 of the Section 182 guidance deals with integrating strategies. And it says to you that effectively you as the licensing authority sit within your wider local authority functions, which include things like equalities, planning, the environment and so on, and properly integrating those in reaching your decisions is a proper consideration for you. So I would say that asking for equalities impact assessment is within the scope of the licensing objectives, and it's something that's increasingly becoming common and relevant, given the impact that we realise that these premises and these events are having on our local and national environments.
As we are in the discussion about this legal issue, I think it's probably appropriate time for me to add my comments to this. And you've heard legal advice from. Oh, thank you very much. On this particular issue, I could leave it to my submissions, but I think it is, with greatest respect to all those present, a difficult area, because it is certainly an extension of the understanding under which licensing is a separate and by necessity a separate consideration than those that involve planning issues, for example, or other wider issues that the council have to deal with that are not under those two particular bodies. And I can speak from my experience over many years now of dealing with licensing applications that never, in my experience, has there been any condition or even a suggestion of a condition on the license that it includes the requirement for an environmental impact assessment. Now, another friend might say, well, things develop, considerations develop, and there's some, suggestion that perhaps it should reach wider. But that's getting very difficult, because what you're actually then considering is a departure to some degree in my submission from the essential elements of what a licensing committee are considering, and that is the impact of the licensable activities, emphasis on licensable activities upon the relevant licensing objectives, which, as we know, public order, in this case, we're considering public nuisance. Now, if you take the wider aspects of public nuisance to say, well, it is a requirement, not even a requirement, it's certainly appropriate for a committee to then consider wider issues that go beyond whether something affects an individual on the basis of noise, or whether it affects someone on the basis of the impact of light, or waste removal, all of which are kind of proper matters for, and have been for many years, for consideration on a license. But then to say, do you know what, we need to have an environmental impact assessment, and it seems that request is for a yearly one. I think it is reaching beyond the remit in my submission of a licensing hearing. Otherwise, why would it be a matter that's firmly parked in the planning stages? And just,
I think for now we are not talking about environmental impact. Certainly in the future we may be, but not currently.
No, and it may well be that the statutory guidance is amended at some point to make that absolutely clear. It might be that the statute is to make it clear. But I was going to finish by saying that Live Nation, who are the parent company of Rewind Festival Limited, have engaged with this whole process, and indeed at the request in the mediation meeting of what do you do about environmental issues, we provided a very comprehensive report, which I had to actually recognise that it was a report specifically on the Rewind Festival for 2022, and we can and are prepared to provide future reports that's available to all the residents, and I think that's referred to in the email that I might have not have mentioned the future reports as well, but certainly we're happy to engage with that. And then let's take this further, because my clients are quite prepared for residents to feed into the team that deals with this sustainability report to raise specific issues. And that's more to the point, because otherwise we may as well have a festival by committee where everybody decides, if they can, exactly what should happen. So on this narrow issue, I thought those are my submissions, and I may have to come back.
Yes, I think that we will be moving that way in the future, but not currently, not for today.
Well, if I can, because my learned friend has given you some wrong legal advice, and I think it would be very unfortunate if your decision was based on bad legal advice. He says your concern is the impact of licensable activities on the relevant licensing objectives. That's just wrong. Your legal advisor will be familiar with the case of Blackpool and Howitt back in, I think, 2010. In that case, a publican decided that he didn't like the smoking ban. He felt it was undermining his natural rights as a publican and an Englishman and so on. And the High Court he argued that licensable activities are only relating to the impact of licensable activities on the relevant licensing objectives. And the High Court said, no, that's wrong. It's any and all crime and disorder, any and all public nuisance. Another publican, there's a theme here, in the Porky Pint Limited, decided quite recently that the COVID restrictions didn't apply. There are all sorts of references to Magna Carta and everything else. And in that case, this is the most recent of the case that came out this year, the licensing objectives are not restricted to alcohol-related harms. And the discussion there was around public health and whether public health is a licensing objective. Of course, it's not a public health is not a licensing objective, but the court said, look at the ordinary meaning of crime, disorder, nuisance. It's a bit like a Venn diagram. If it fits within the ordinary use of that, then it's part of the licensing objectives. So when we think about, for example, the Section 17 crime and disorder duty on you, which is about to look at the impact of events that might have in terms of crime, antisocial behaviour and adverse impacts on the environment, another legal commitment that is on you, it is quite clear as Kieran has said, everything from noise, pollution, waste, burning, the carbon footprint, all quite naturally and easily fall within the ordinary meaning of crime, disorder, and nuisance. Because if you have an operator that brings in 40,000 people over a weekend, not including the build-up and break-up, ravages your local community, leaves your rivers and fields in a state, local toilets leaking, their best efforts mean that there's rubbish thrown out of the windows into the hedges. That is having an environmental impact, which is a crime, it's a disorder, it's antisocial behaviour, and it is a public nuisance. So for you to require an environmental impact assessment has got nothing to do with planning, it has everything to do with licensing, and is full square within the established legal principles that my learned friend is trying to steer you away from. And that is not what the High Court says. So requesting environmental impact assessments is not something of the future. It is something of today, because it is relevant today, because this summer you will have 40,000 people with vendors saying, all our cups are recyclable when they are not. You will have overfilled chemical toilets. You will have carbon operated engines and vehicles on this narrow lane. So for you to ask for an environmental impact assessment, certainly this year, if not this year and beyond, is a legitimate part of your duties, which are set out in your policies to promote the public interest. So it's not for tomorrow, it's for today, which is why we ask you to require the operators that you've entrusted with this license to do no more than meet that trust and tell us what their true impacts on the environment are. Thank you.
Can I stop both of you now for a moment, please, and ask that we may take some advice from Neil?
Yeah, I think it opens up a very interesting question, which is where is the line going to be drawn? And certainly you heard from Kieran, the traditional forms of environmental damage that can occur. I think there's a line when you're talking about things like carbon footprint, for example. And I hear what Mr. Charalambri says, of course, you could argue that that has an impact on the local community. See the argument the other way, saying, well, carbon footprint, okay, it's globally an issue, but how does it specifically impact on this particular community? I see maybe a dividing line opening there. My advice is, unfortunately, there's no law, I think, on where that line actually ends. I hope this is not the case where that happens. I think my advice, I'm very interested to see what is meant by an environmental impact assessment. And the reason for that is bring us right back to basics in terms of what you've got to consider today, because you're reviewing this license and you're particularly asked to review the conditions of this license. So one of the questions you're going to need to ask yourselves is, one, is it appropriate to add or amend any of the conditions? And if you do, what do those conditions actually require? Because it's important for the license holder to know what is expected from them. So my advice is it's not unreasonable for you, if you're persuaded, to require an environmental impact assessment, because it clearly will affect some of those what I call traditional areas of environmental damage. That's not unreasonable. We need to be clear, if you do make that, what is actually required, because the premises license holder needs to know what is and isn't required from that. But that's my advice concerning that. But I open to my learned friends if they've got anything different to say.
Yes, well, I do need to respond, of course, to Mr. Charalambri's comments that I've given wrong advice on law, and that is not correct. I've not been provided, by the way, with a copy of the Porcupine case, but I don't think I need to for the purpose of this discussion, because under paragraph 9.4 of the statutory guidance, the section 182 statutory guidance, what it states is, and this is what I said to the committee, so I'm not giving wrong advice here. What it says is that representations should relate to the impact of licensable activities carried on at the premises on the licensing objectives. That's virtually a repeat of the advice that I'm now being criticised for giving. Furthermore, that in the council's own licensing policy, and just as an aside here, I do appreciate that you may need to look at that policy and what it should contain, and that might be a matter for those who operate licenses in the future to have regard to in terms of the future progress of premises licenses within this borough. But paragraph 2.4 states each of the 4 licensing objectives is of equal importance and will be considered in relation to matters centred on the premises or within the control of the licensee and the effect which the operation of that business has on the vicinity. The licensing authority will primarily focus on the direct impact of the activities taking place at the licensed premises on members of the public living, working or engaged in normal activity in the area concerned. The Act is not a primary mechanism for controlling general nuisance unconnected to licensable activities or the licensing objectives. That is the submission that I made earlier in a nutshell. And it goes further, I think, because when you actually look at what the purpose is of this review, there's kind of a request, this general request for an environmental impact assessment, but there's nothing evidentially to suggest, as my learned friend has kind of put into the arena now, that there's problems with waste going into the rivers, that there's issues of an environmental nature on carbon footprint, that is relevant to an application for a review of a license. And so it's a strange request to say, oh yes, we need an environmental impact assessment, but not back that up with evidence on the wider ranging issues. You know, I know we talked about the impact of the bleepers, which obviously can fit within that criteria in the matter for the committee to consider. But so that is my particular submission on that. And I do come back to the point that we are offering something. The company is also moving forward, and we are offering something, and that is a sustainability report. And maybe if we just renamed that an environmental impact assessment, it might actually be the answer to everyone's problems. But
and my opinion, and I'm not qualified in any way to give an opinion, is that is something that we will need to look at for the future. I don't know whether that's right, but it's too late to do much for this year. We can do bits of things, but I don't think we can do a whole impact assessment.
Well, as I mentioned before, Chair, my clients are not obstructive here. You can see from the email that was sent on it. We want to engage with the residents, and I'll come back to that issue on the other matters. In relation to this one area, we're quite happy to have feedback and for that to go through to there's a sustainability team that deal with, that are experts in this field. And if comments are made, we are concerned about something happening in the rivers, whatever it is, that will be looked at and addressed that, because this is a corporate company that obviously has its own environmental strategy. Hence, it led to the aspect of Green Nation, I think it's called, Green Nation. I don't think we need to be contentious about this, but what I'm very, very concerned about on behalf of my clients is this idea, yes, let's just have a condition asking and requiring an environmental impact assessment.
Well, I think your legal advisor makes a very useful point about the environmental impact assessment. Indeed, Mr. Cryer recognises. And I think the evidence has been provided by your report. So when you say there's no evidence, you've given me loads. That's where I get the information about the plastic cups and the way in which they need to deal with their carbon footprint and so on. So the evidence is there. And it does seem to me that an environmental impact assessment is now a pretty regular tool for those that work in the industry. They will look at a site and they'll say, well, do we need to think about water, air, wildlife, plants, waste? And they'll either say yes or no. And so the suggestion that is being made and perhaps being refined in this discussion is that continues to be done. And the way I read the sustainability assessment is that this is done by Green Nation on an annual basis. You already need noise reports, waste reports, and so on. There are so many reports required in the premises license that one environmental assessment might be just how much paper is used to satisfy the needs of all these lawyers that want reports and more reports. But it does seem to me that in much the same way as that we're saying, well, okay, let's get your traffic management plan right this time. Let's monitor you to see if you get it right. we can do the same with a report, whether it's sustainable or whether it is called an environmental impact assessment, and say that for 2023, the premises license holder must engage an independent consultant and or Green Nation if needed to provide the licensing authority and local residents with an environmental impact report, which as a minimum addresses your own carbon policy and then such other matters as the expert, which we are not, deems appropriate. And we would ask that that expert just ask for feedback from local residents, which may or may not be relevant. But that is not a big ask, given what we all are recognising, mostly Green Nation, who are your people, are telling me that the carbon impact at the northern event has increased 24%. In the southern event, it's 12%, that we still struggle with transport. We can't get people to use taxis. There's excessive use of cars. There's excessive use of black bin bags, not enough segregation of waste, and so on and so forth. And it's very helpful for that all to be supplied to me by the operator.
We started doing it. We are trying to improve what we're doing.
I think there's a...
And so to improve would be to have this assessment that we're asking for. That I don't think we're an adversarial place. We're saying good work and do more.
Could I say one thing? I've probably held 120 licenses right across the country. Never have we had to provide an environmental assessment. And I'm not saying that's right or wrong. I'm just saying we've never done it. And as your colleague makes the point, I don't know what's in it. And I suspect that whilst you may well say that, you know, this is something that everybody is doing, in my experience, it is not something that everybody is doing. And until we have a framework by which we can actually respond, you know, and it's a bit like risk assessment. I'm so old, you know, risk assessments came in my time. And until risk assessments were understood and we knew who we could commission to actually do it, it was a problem for everybody. You know, we've taken steps. We fully accept we need to take more steps. And that's why we have a team in there that are looking at it. But until we have some clear guidelines on what it is that everybody is looking for, we're trying to lead the way in it, not follow up. But it's easy to sit there and say, well, you should be doing more for your green credentials. I agree.
I mean, just on this issue of you know, we have provided this report accepting that there are elements of there which clearly demonstrate that there are improvements that can be made. I mean, we wouldn't, you know, hesitate to say that. That's the whole idea of this new approach by Green Nation, which is part of the Live Nation umbrella, to say, where are we now? And what do we need to look at for the future?
I think we're all saying the same thing,
well,
that we need to move forward. But I'd like to ask Kieran, from the licensing point of view, where this fits in for us now.
I mean, I think really the sort of question that's being tabled is what do we want to see in that report? If we were to create an environmental impact assessment, what is it that we would want to see in there? You can perhaps take a bit of a steer from the sustainability assessment. It does cover the topics that you would expect, but I think that there needs to perhaps be some sort of clarity. It does appear to be the case that there are steps from the license holder to look at their carbon footprint and to look at what it is that they're doing around waste and litter and sustainability. It looks very evident, and also when we look at the data, there's a lot of work that can be done. They've been transparent with that. In terms of how that can fit in terms of the license, there's a use to have it, but then also what would we do with that? And would it be the case that we'd be expecting to see those improvements year on year? I think it is stepping into a relatively new territory, and perhaps with the sustainability report that's been given, that's already showing some weight from the event organisers. Unless there's anything that's specifically added for you in terms of what you're looking for from a condition, well-being.
I think we're saying the same thing.
We are,
in a different way.
Yes, and
we're going this way, and we need to go together.
Yes, and in a nutshell, that's why we have to deal with this on a voluntary basis until matters are clear, until the development of this area is assessed. And it may be that the sustainability report that we're happy to share with the residents next year, I must admit, I've not checked with my clients whether this is something they do every single year.
It's a new program that is ongoing, and we have offered to have our team come and discuss with the residents.
But it is another reason to just say, let's be careful not to impose a condition that, first of all, obligates us to do something without a clear understanding of what the purpose is, and stay on the voluntary approach to this, because, as I say, we're quite happy to move forward in this area.
Well, it seems that it's quite exciting to be at the cutting edge of licensing here in the basement at Wokingham. And we all do seem to be in agreement, because there is an environmental impact assessment. It's just called a sustainability report.
Yes.
We've heard that there's an annual commitment to it. We've heard that there's budgets and fundings for it. We've heard that they want to engage with residents and ask their views, all of which is great. We've heard that there's a value to it. And of course, the value to it is there's a licensing policy and there is your own sustainability policies. What do you do with it? Well, you assess whether or not things are working. And if they are having adverse impact, then there are other consequences. There are remedies that need to be put in. I started at the beginning to say that, reviews are about remedies and audits. So creating a condition ensures that you have that report. That's what we're asking for. And insofar as we don't know what an environmental impact assessment includes, it's an environmentalist, such as are already employed, looking at the site and setting out what are the impacts. We already have one. And so ensuring that there's a condition that tells you moving forward, this happened in 2022, because I've got that report here. 2023 will have however many months after August is necessary, 24 and so on, gives us a set of data that we can look at and chart improvements or impacts. So it seems to me that insofar as environmental impact assessment is concerned, the only difference is whether you accept it as a condition or whether you accept it as an undertaking. I'm clearly urging a condition, because there's already a lot that's relied upon for trust in this license, and clarity favours conditions. And in fact, one of the reforms behind the Licensing Act 2003 was when licensing was in the magistrates' courts, undertakings were given and they couldn't be enforced. A conditions ensures that it can be enforced. What we've done very generously is said the contents, the nature, the structure, the form of this environmental impact assessment, we're going to trust you to do it. You trust us by making sure we get it.
Can we just have a break now? It's very warm.
Yes. I just had one very brief break. I don't want to lose the energy in responding to this debate that is now becoming a legal debate of should it be a condition or should it not. There is one fundamental point here. It's premature to be looking at a situation where we volunteered our sustainability report and now it's being thrown back at us, which is kind of, saying, okay, we've seen this, we're not happy with it, therefore let's put it as a condition on the license.
I'm congratulating them, Mark. That's what I'm doing.
Yeah. I'll leave it at that.
We're just going to get some fresh air. Can we just wait for a Can we just have a 10-minute break?
Yeah, I must leave sadly, so apologies for that. I'm assuming there's no requirement for input, but I'm happy to give it if there is.
Okay, thank
you.
Just open the doors.
Yes.
Too much hot air from lawyers. Isn't it?
Legal pollution.
One of you, is it?
I won't
break. I'm leaving the door open. There isn't a lot of passing traffic here.
Leave it open.
I think so, otherwise we'll expire. And we're on to item 11 on our hearing procedure now. And so it's your turn as the licence holders to put questions to the applicant. You may already have asked some of the questions that you want to ask.
Yes, I'm going to adopt perhaps a slightly different approach to this and not ask any questions, to give our submissions an address, and then I might turn to my clients just for one or two additional points. But to try and move this forward, because it is, we need to try and focus on what the issues are that are of concern, if that's helpful. So is it my...
Yes, you.
My submission? Can I start with this white noise issue, please, Chair? Because we have had the opportunity of a conversation outside with Mr. Brown about this. There is an existing condition on the licence, page 20 of your agenda bundle. At the moment, it says white noise beepers will be used on plant operating less than 150 metres from the boundary of residential properties. Genuinely, the mediation meeting, I was joining in online. It wasn't very easy to hear everything. I think my learned friend is in the same position. But we thought that the change to that was agreed at well, I'll say less than 100 metres. It should be not less than 100 metres. So change it from 150 to 100 metres. But apparently, Mr. Brown's concern really is about all vehicles. So obviously, we're only in control of contracted vehicles by us. So the proposal is to change the wording to amend the conditions, subject, of course, to the committee's approval. And I haven't had the opportunity of reading this out in full to my learned friends, so you may have comment on it. To white noise beepers will be used on plant and vehicles contracted by the premises licence holder. And best endeavours will be used to require non-contracted vehicles, and then I kind of came to a stop because I wasn't quite sure how to finish it, to comply to the same criteria or words to that effect. That's not quite the right wording, but I think the principle is...
I think we get what you mean.
Yeah, you understood. Because obviously we're not in control of non-contracted vehicles, but we'll do our best. So the example is of delivery vehicles. We don't know they're delivering, they're not contracted by us. We don't know who exactly it will be, but we'll use our best endeavours to try and encourage them to also use white noise bleepers.
Can I ask our experts about that wording, Kieran and Neil?
Yeah, Chair, I'm just trying to find the relevant extract in the license just to see exactly.
Line of 13.
Thank you very much.
Yeah, you've not got numbers, have you? There's no numbers on these conditions.
It's just above the number 1800.
Yeah, just below. Yeah.
Right. Yes, it is quicker. It is quicker.
Okay.
Neil, are you happy with the word?
Just reading it now.
Criteria doesn't sound right, but it's...
Apply to the same standard?
Yes, I'm happy with that.
Sorry to interrupt. So the bit we're looking at is the current condition is white noise bleepers will be used on plant operating less than 150 metres from the boundary of residential.
Yes.
So are you proposing an extra condition to that, or to?
No, replace it. Yes. So the condition is wrongly worded as it is anyway, as Mr. Brown pointed out.
Right. What about plant?
Yeah. Yes, included. Yeah.
Included.
Okay. So white noise beepers will be used on plant and vehicles contracted by the premises licence holder.
Yeah.
And best endeavours will be used require non-contracted vehicles to comply to the same standard.
And then operating less than 100.
Just take out the reference.
Yeah.
Take it out.
Okay, well, no, that sounds fine, Chair.
Yeah, was that fine with you?
Absolutely. Thank you very much.
You.
We've done some
Partnership.
Chief,
in action.
Chief Summit. Now, you'll be pleased to hear I'm not going to go into any further detail about the issue of the sustainability report. I think where we've reached is, I know the friend and those you represent wanted as a condition the environmental impact assessment. We're saying we don't think it should be a condition, but we are happy to engage with the residents, provide our sustainability report each year, and we're happy for them to engage in comments on that sustainability report. So that is our position, as you've heard. The request for the draft traffic management plan, as you know, we've provided the draft traffic management plan for this year. We're happy to do so for future years as well. And obviously, the thing about traffic management plans, as with any event management plans, is that they are subject to change. So they're flexible documents. They're living documents, is the term that's usually used. But of course, there comes a stage when the meat of the issues are in the draft management, in this case, the draft traffic management plan. And we're happy to engage with residents, if they've got particular proposals. And that comes down to the community meeting, which we've proposed as part of our mediation issue here. So at the moment, what we've done is we've said we've provided, here is our draft traffic management plan for this year, the same for the event safety management plan. I think we can commit that in future years, we are again happy to provide those reports when they're available. So in the case of the ESMP, that has to be provided to the council 3 months prior to the event. And so at the same time, we will provide that to the RFRA as a matter of engagement with them. And so that obviously allows them the opportunity to offer their comments in relation to that. The draft traffic management plan, I don't know that we can put a timescale on when that would be provided to the Residents Association.
It would be sensible if we tied it in with all of the documentation that goes into the council. If we were to supply, as we do to the council, at the same time we then provide it to.
Is the draft traffic management plan available to the council 3 months before?
Yeah, it could be.
Yeah. You sure?
Well,
we need to be certain that it can be.
Well, we've provided it now. So
yeah, no. The reason is debating this with my client is that I know from experience that sometimes the traffic management plan comes a bit later. So I just don't.
The license condition is one month prior to the event.
Okay.
It does tend to be later to the event.
Yeah. So we will provide the draft traffic management plan to RFRA at least 1 month prior to the event. And as part of the engagement in this community meeting, there may well, of course, be issues that they raise relevant to traffic management. There will be, I'm sure, and that will help feed into the traffic management plan that's been provided subsequently. So that the point 3 on the mediation email that I sent to Mr. Hinchcliffe, and I forwarded a copy to my learned friend, is that within 2 to 4 weeks of delivering the ESMP, my clients will arrange a community meeting with local residents to discuss any concerns. So if you want to turn that into a condition, my clients are happy for that to be a condition on the license. And I think it can just be a full stop there, rather than taking the second sentence from Green Nation. So within 2 to 4 weeks of delivering the ESMP, my clients will arrange a community meeting with local residents to discuss any concerns. And we've used the term local residents because it might not be solely restricted to residents of the Farm Association. It may be others. I think that's right. And I think, if I'm correct, that leaves us with the point of the Safety Advisory Group issue. And And we cannot agree, sadly, to the Safety Advisory Group being a mechanism for civil engagement at that meeting. That would not be a condition that we would find and consider to be appropriate for the license. And there are a few reasons for that. The first one is that, certainly to my knowledge, there might be a license out there where it is a condition on the license, but I don't know of any precedent for it at all as a license condition. The second element to it is that the requirement in the existing conditions is quite a comprehensive license in terms of what it obligates the premises license holder to do. And on page 17 of your agenda, the agenda documents, sort of like the second paragraph where it says the organizer will attend. So the organizer will attend the appropriate number of SAG meetings at the discretion of the SAG and event organisers. As we've heard, it is a voluntary meeting. The organizer will provide a draft ESMP at least 3 months prior to each event. ESMP must be approved with the SAG at least 1 month prior to the event. Now let's just take that condition for one moment. The ESMP must be approved by the SAG. So if we're saying that this SAG has to include, by virtue of a condition, if you impose it as a condition, representatives from civil society, whether it's the leader of the parish council or any other person or Women's Institute, whoever that is, then I'm afraid we're holding the complete control on whether or not our event can run to other bodies who are not part of the responsible authorities, and that wouldn't be a palatable position as one can understand for a premises license holder to be in. One of the difficult areas of SAGs is that, and this is quite a familiar condition, you know, the SAG have got to approve your event, and so it really does hold the premises license holder, the event organizer, to the metal in terms of getting all their plans in place that satisfy the Safety Advisory Group. And as you've heard, principally, in fact, I won't list every single one, but it's really about crowd management controls. Are your security plans there? Have you got your adverse weather plan sorted? Have you got your traffic management plan in place? Is that an acceptable traffic management plan to highways and to those who engage in that process? Noise management. Has your noise management plan been satisfactory for the environmental health officer who's charged with the responsibility? And I could go on, and Mr. Hinchcliffe kindly, set out who is actually involved in that. And it's all people who do have an expertise and an involvement in these particular areas. That is not to say that those residents who live in this locality don't have any say in what should be happening in terms of the event that takes place. But we simply cannot require a condition that they have an involvement. Further than that, in the SAG, further than the Safety Advisory Group, and it will be becoming more and more necessary to do this, will be engaged on matters of greater sensitivity. And I'm particularly concerned here about the issue of counterterrorism. Because as a result of Martin's Law, which is coming out of the Manchester Arena bombing inquiry, it will be a requirement for there to be quite specific plans on what the CT, if I can abbreviate it, CT measures will be going forward, and they will need to be addressed by senior police representatives and others at a meeting such as the Safety Advisory. Medical provision, of course, they will come in to feed into that. Not that there's a particular sensitivity about that in itself. So we do need to be careful in the future. We will need to be careful about licensing plans. We will need to be careful about event safety management plans. But what we will particularly need to be careful about is the aspect of where that goes into the public domain. And it goes into the public domain as soon as you present it to a body where civilians who are not held to public authority accountability positions are engaged in that. So I hope I've made the point strongly that we're happy to have this meeting that's 2 to 4 weeks before an event takes place. And if there's anything that, even outside those meetings, if there's anything that RFRA or other residents say, can you draw this to the attention of the SAG? They can approach the body of the SAG and say, we want this to be addressed at the Safety Advisory Group meeting. There's nothing to stop them doing that. And so it doesn't actually need the premises license condition that constrains a premises license holder to a point where we may be in a position that we just simply cannot hold the event. So I hope I've made the position clear on our objection to that. In truth, the whole festival relies on trust. It relies on trust with the licensing authority, with the responsible authorities, many of whom are on the Safety Advisory Group and those others, and then you run your event, and then you have your debrief afterwards. And we're happy about that debrief element in relation to the traffic management plan, for example, which I didn't mention earlier, but we're happy to engage with the residents on, did it work? And that can be incorporated within the traffic management plan condition. So we're not being uncooperative here. We're not dismissing the residents. We know they have a part to play, but it's not the kind of situation where you can have an event run by committee. We've just got to, run the event, have an element of trust, engage with them. We didn't have any requests, first of all, from the Residents Association with respect to them to say, look, we're very concerned about different areas of this. We're actually considering having a review of the license, but before we review the license, let's have a meeting. If we'd received a request like that, then I'm sure my clients would have said, yes, let's have a meeting. Well, okay, if I've got that wrong, then let's move forward. Let's move forward. The position we're in, there is a review. How do we deal with it? And that's, and I think we're kind of in a consensual position here where we're putting forward quite a lot here to offer that. And I'll just finally say, before I turn over to my clients, because they may have particular issues that have been raised to mention, that none of the responsible authorities who are served with a copy of the review application by law, none of them have come forward to add weight to that to add weight to the review. And so one can take it from the silence that we've received from them that they do not have any specific issues with the operation of the event, with the premises license conditions, but we are looking to go forward with these new proposals. Is there anything specific?
No, you didn't want to mention numbers.
Oh, well, only the fact that the number keeps being bandied around of 20,000 people a day. It isn't 20,000 people a day. It's closer to 13 or 14,000, but I think that's really a detail rather than anything else.
Yes, I mean the 20,000 is, I think,
it's actually 23,000.
Yeah, 23,000 is the license capacity, but it doesn't necessarily mean
it's not 23 per day.
No.
So what was the gate last year?
The way you have to look at this is there are weekend tickets sold and then there are day tickets sold. So each day will vary slightly. On average, there are just short of 8,000 people camping there, and 4,000 people on weekend tickets. Those tend to be local residents who are able to walk in or out, or people who are staying in B&Bs or
got a boat.
Or got a boat. Well, boats, yeah, exactly. All of those bits. And then there are so averagely on a Saturday about 13 or 14, probably about slightly less than that, 12 or 13 on the Sunday. Sundays are always slightly less popular because people are going
on now.
Yeah.
Yes.
Any more questions?
Was specifically on the license holders. I did have something that's a slip online. So, no.
Okay, let's go. Item 14 on the agenda says the applicant will have an opportunity to put questions to the licence holder.
So just, sorry, sir, I think your question has come to you, has it?
So the continuity, I'm also a local resident. So if there's a continuity, I'm probably it. We fully accept that last year we didn't cover ourselves in glory with the traffic management, particularly on the breakdown after the event. And already, I hope, addressed that by changing increasing the number of days that we actually put a steward at the top of the lane. But the fundamental problem is, even though you have AA signage that tells everybody the way to go in this day and age of sat-nav, and everybody knows better, they stick their sat-nav in, they get a route. Some of them, English is not necessarily their first language, and so they're not reading the signs, and they turn in. And it's as frustrating for us as it is, I'm sure, for local residents. So we've already, I hope, addressed the issues of putting an additional steward up there to make sure that the traffic goes the way it's intended to go.
So if I may, the anecdote, I'm a steam nut. I go to the Great Dorset Steam Fair.
Yeah. And that has some traffic at it as well.
One particularly, much bigger event.
Yeah.
One particular year they changed contractors. It was absolute chaos.
Yeah.
So they went back to the original contractors and it went smooth again. So really my question is, what are you changing this time round?
We changed last year.
One man on the road junction.
Well, that seems
in radio contact with the guy at the other end of the lane.
His only function is to make sure that the lorries don't turn down the road. That's his simple and sole function, that they go up to the top and they come down Remenham Church Lane. We, in answer to the local residents last year, the actual car parking, etc., is done by a company called CTM, Cash and Traffic Management, who deal with all of that. The local residents were not happy with their stewards and asked us to employ a company called Chevron, who had done it the year before, and we employed Chevron. So all we've now done is to increase the number of people on that roster in order, hopefully, to make it work better.
And the number of days.
It used to, that cover used to be just over the show weekend. So what we've agreed to do is to put it in for the day we start and then the day we finish. So the Monday
all the way through,
so that there is somebody there for the duration. Which was an additional request, which we agreed.
Can I just add to that, because it was mentioned, my mother and a friend, I'm sorry I missed the point earlier, that it cannot be expected as a condition on the license that that you have to employ a certain company.
Yeah.
And I think that point's been understood.
Can I just a point of clarification here? And you say you're going to put these stewards, marshals there. When there were marshals last year, they didn't do anything. They allowed the traffic to come through. And as I said earlier, when I asked them, sitting in their cars doing nothing, why are you not sending the traffic up the hill? They said, we don't have the power to stop them. So somebody there isn't the solution. In Henley Regatta, Balfour Beatty, they put a barrier across the end of the lane with people there. So there's a very clear way of stopping. Neil Brown found one of the stewards asleep. They did nothing. So saying you're going to put somebody there, I have to say, doesn't give us any comfort at all. What's the power? What else will you do? Will you put barriers across the end of Remenham Lane to stop traffic?
We are not allowed to close that road, as you well know, because it's open to the public and it is a two-way road.
Henley Regatta has a traffic order which allows that.
Yes, but you have objected to that traffic order for Rewind.
It's the one-way system.
This is the point we raised at the mediation meeting. I don't disagree with you.
No,
if we had a one-way system, we'd be delighted.
Because then the signs will simply say no entry, but we can't do that because it's two-way. That's the biggest problem we have.
But there's discussion, a lot of it, about the traffic plan. We don't have problems specifically with the traffic plan, maybe some detail. It's the fact that it didn't work. And it's the fact that, as I said earlier, when the event was finished, there was no pretense.
Okay, we've accepted that.
We have accepted that.
Could I ask the question, when I asked you, Steve, why this was happening, you said you didn't have the manpower.
As I said in the mediation meeting, I said to you, I don't have the qualified manpower. You cannot simply stick me at the end of a road to implement highway.
No one there.
You can't do that.
Perhaps take control of your meeting.
It's very difficult to do, and yes, we need to talk about whether that works or not, and you need to make it work.
Yeah.
Yes.
And we've accepted that. In order for somebody to direct traffic on the public highway, they have to have Schedule 50 accreditation. Right. So when we're asked to just throw somebody on there because it wasn't in the schedule, we don't have someone with a Schedule 50 accreditation. I mean, simple 3-day course, but nevertheless, the police on the regatta, the other issue is the police. It is a public highway and the police take responsibility for the traffic. They can wave their hand. As we all know, the police will not do traffic management in any shape or form these days and haven't done for about 15 years. So we have to employ reputable companies to come in and do that on our behalf who will have qualified staff. Now,
And you will do that.
we have done and we will do it. And we don't want to be here any more than anybody else wants to be here. It takes a lot of our time. So, you know, we accept and we have accepted mistakes were made and it could be done better.
Brilliant.
I asked a question for you, Mark. I think we were at questions. I've been watching this to and fro, and it's not particularly surprising. And it underlines why I think it's so important for this discussion to be in a mediated, hosted environment. I'd suggested the SAG, but it does seem to me what my learned friend is saying and what we're observing is the following.
Questions of the applicant.
Well, Mum, just through you.
Well,
because I'm going to get to an
but I'll have to respond to it.
I'll get to the question, just listen. So, Mum, through you, what we seem to be saying is that we need a forum for this discussion to be held and mediated. And it seems to me what we're looking at is saying that if we put the SAG aside, the local authority will host and chair a community engagement meeting, which must be at least 3 months before the event and at least 1 month before the event and 1 month after. There's already a condition under the SAG where it says the local authority hosts the SAG as appropriate. Because what's the point, and you've seen it get heated, of the event saying, you come and talk to us. They say, you said, no, we didn't, we said. It gets nowhere. There's nothing effective. So Kieran very kindly hosted the mediation meeting and provided a pilot. The SAG condition provides a precedent and an example. Now, it may well be no one turns up, in which case, great. Or it may well be that we get a round table discussion. And so when it comes to the traffic, the officer from the council chairing it will say, well, this needs to go to highways. Let me take this concern to the people raising the traffic management order. Now, putting it a condition, make sure that it's organised, it's timetabled, it's part of this process, and then fully engaging with civil society for all the reasons I've suggested. So my question is, can we not put that as a condition along the lines of the local authority must host and chair a community engagement meeting as appropriate, but at least 3 months and 1 month before the event and 1 month after the event. The premises license holder must attend. Now, these conditions are on licenses, and if no one attends, no one attends. The community meeting must, as a minimum, include discussion of and reference to the draft management operations and proposals and the environmental assessments, because in the letter from Mr. Cryer, he's already said at this community meeting we can have Green Nation along. So we've got a system which works where conversation can happen in a productive way rather than a talking shop. Would that be acceptable to
Well,
Can I just, before we go there, can I just take the advice of the officers?
yes, although he may wish to hear my submissions on that before he gives his advice. With respect, the principle of the purpose of the community residence meeting, no issue with that at all, because you know that's what it's there for, to engage in discussions about traffic management issues, any other issues, and include in that. I don't think there's any issue about including in that environmental matters as well. And if the representative of the nation can come along, then absolutely fine. So if you wish to incorporate that within the condition that we've effectively proposed through our email in the as a result of the mediation meeting, then absolutely no issue at all. I think it is going too far to then say that meeting has to be 3 months before, it has to then be another meeting 1 month before, and then a follow-up meeting 1 month after within 1 month after the event as a conditionality on the license. I mentioned before, and there is actually just one narrow issue here. It's about the control of residents, Remenhun Lane. So it doesn't need to suddenly escalate to the point, right, okay, because that hasn't been decided today at this meeting and finalised, except my clients are saying, yeah, they think they can improve on it this year. So it doesn't require a condition suddenly said, right, okay, that's got to be a 3-month meeting before 1 month and 1 month after. My clients, I'm sure, will be happy to facilitate more than just one meeting. But it just doesn't need to be conditioned in that way so that it's prescriptive and we're kind of in a position where 3 months before we're having to attend a meeting when matters have only just been submitted in terms of the event management plan to the licensing authority.
Okay, thank you. Can I ask Neil and Kieran?
Yeah, absolutely. So you've got to think from the local authority side of things. We're running the safety advisory groups. We run safety advisory groups for several events all the way through. So it's an administrative task with lots of bodies, lots of parties involved. And quite often there are challenges that need to be aired out in SAG meetings. For Rewind Festival, we will go through a SAG meeting, and what we would take is the event safety management plan, and we'll take the documents first. We will then circulate that with the lead agencies. And then when we get to the SAG meeting, that's where issues are discussed, and we have a presentation and we have feedback on learnings from the previous year. So in terms of adding a meeting into it, which is a residents meeting, we've heard that there's no appetite to have the clerk of Remenhun Parish Council on board for the SAGs, and really the direction is to go into a separate residents meeting. That's democracy. I mean, that is what local government is for. So absolutely, a local authority should be there involved in chairing that whole purpose of local government. In terms of the frequency, I think what needs to be looked at is pre-event and post-event. So there needs to be a point where a SAG is completed and we have the documents in and we have the actual SAG meeting. And then as part of that, we have a residents meeting somewhere around that time. And then post-event, we have a sort of wash-up meeting after it's all been closed down, the site's been cleared away, a relatively quick wash-up meeting in terms of what went well, what didn't go well. And I think those two meetings would probably serve the purposes for the residents. And if we have them quite tight to the event, from the event license holder's perspective, they're in an action mode, they're in a completely different world to what I would be in and what we would be in. And then from a resident's perspective, where they want to see change and they want to see input, you're sort of creating that mold. So some sort of meeting that's quite close tight to the event to feed in there. And perhaps if we've got an agreement to share these documents in advance, we get the documents shared in advance, but then have the meeting quite tight in. And if there's any comments that need to be made in advance of that meeting, we can do that. Quite often do that with the SAG. If anyone sees the documents and they want to feedback in, we'll get that circulated. So we'd probably be looking at those two sort of meetings.
How quickly a sustainability report is going to be available, I can't guarantee that to you all the time.
The principle of what Mr. Hinchcliffe has indicated is agreeable to my clients. But there'll to be one meeting, I think we said, is it 2 to 4 weeks of delivering the SMP? That's what we're proposing. But it might be that it's might have to be a little bit later. Maybe we should just make that a bit more flexible, within 2 to 6 weeks of delivering the SMP. Just throwing that out. So one before, chaired by local authority, if the local authority have the resources to do that. It is the danger of a condition that sometimes it can, constrain you to a point where you haven't got the flexibility outside it. So we're agreeable to the principle, meeting before, the meeting after, absolutely agreeable. Here we are before the licensing committee saying that. It's a matter for the committee if you think that that should be conditioned on the license.
I think the principle is agreeable, so I'm really grateful for that indication. I welcome the officer's commitment to that. I don't think we should have the SAG is at meetings as required. I think that there should be a minimum of one before and one after, and otherwise left to the discretion of the licensing officer, because that's how the SAG works. In a sense, they're the honest broker, the fulcrum around which all the parties can operate. And it would be for the licensing authority to determine, in 2-3 years' time, maybe all the residents move and no one wants to turn up, then the premises license holder shouldn't be bound by this, nor should the licensing authority. So I think giving the licensing authority the flexibility to have at least one before and one after, and the timing of the documents and the timing of those meetings should be done in such a way as to be useful. Then I think, again, in principle, that would be useful. When I come to make my closing submissions, I will talk about the importance of conditionality, but I do think all of these need to be as conditions, but I'll deal with that later on. But it seems that in principle, we have agreement about white noise. We have agreement as to not engagement in a SAG, but in this residents meeting, if you will. We've got broad agreement in terms of the environmental information. And the only sticking point is whether you make these as conditions or you just accept these as promises that will be done by the premises license holder. I think that's the only point of contention between us.
Well, we have agreed to a number of conditions, so I think I've been quite clear about those that we don't think should be conditions. One, of course, as you know, is the Safety Advisory Group requirement, but the principal agreement in conditionality is providing the event safety management plan to the residents at the same time as it's presented to the local authority, to provide the draft traffic management plan. I think we said, did we 1 month before to the residents association, time that it's presented to the licensing authority. A condition in relation to the holding of a community meeting, and I do agree with my learned friend. Totally in agreement. It needs to have that flexibility in terms of, particularly if the local authority are arranging it in terms of timing, reports going before, comfortable with that, and we're comfortable with the principle of it being before the event and after the event. But as I said, matter for the committee on that, whether it's conditioned or whether it's just left as a matter of trust between the parties. And then the other condition that we've agreed is the white noise condition, which we're proposing as well. The sustainability report, impact assessment, environmental impact assessment. I'm uncomfortable without my client's approval in just saying that we will provide a sustainability report every year at a certain time. And so we'll prefer it not to be a condition on the license. That's all I can say. If the licensing committee really feel that it should be a condition on the license, then I will just take it back to my clients and say that is what is required. But can we call it what we do actually present, and that is a sustainability report, rather than having to go back to a corporate company and say, no, you need to call it something different.
Thank you. I'd like to move on to item 15 now, if I may.
Is there an opportunity to anyone else to raise the question? Anything?
Just coming on to that now. I'm just coming on to that now. Yeah. Item 15 said the chairman will then invite any responsible authorities or other persons who have made representations to speak in order to facilitate effective hearings. Other persons making similar representations would be asked to nominate a spokesman, so not everyone speaking. At the conclusion of the spokesman's representation, the chairman will ask the other persons if they have any points to raise. So that's the opportunity now. If there's only you that wants to speak, then speak. If you all want to speak, then we just need one of you to speak.
I may want to hear from Mr. Cryer first.
I do beg your pardon. don't know the gentleman's name, and I don't know if he's made a representation to part of the RFI. Oh, he is part of the RFI. Okay,
all the residents are part of it.
okay, I don't take any issue.
Is Mr. Dudley's name on the list of
Yes.
on the representative? Okay.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you. No, obviously no issue if it's been.
Okay, Mr. Dudley, would you like to speak?
My name is Michael Dudley, and I've been involved in these presentations many years. I just find it very difficult to come to it. I read about the safety advisory group and the people who are going to attend. The Mob Object Fire Rescue, Westminster, all these various people, they're going to attend and they're going to set foot in, probably not even in Revenant when they attend them. I don't even know where this meeting is held. They're going to go to that meeting and they're going to pull out the things from previous years. They're going to have the meeting and they've ticked the boxes. Oh, we always done all this, and then when we get run over, helicopters going to be there. They've done that. They're not going to set foot in again. They will have no experience whatsoever of what has actually happened when that festival is taking place. And all we are asking is being a member of the safety advisory group say, well, hang on, this is what happened. This is what happened. And we'd like you to take this into account when you do it. And I think the suggestion up to say the residents or the parish council should not be involved in the safety advisory group is not acceptable in any shape or form to ourselves.
Does anyone else want to add anything?
Can I just, I personally don't have a problem with non-representation, but we do need to be clear as to whether the residents can provide input for the SAG discussion, and why should that not be possible, that we provide input. We could decide what the vehicle is, but there is information out there that's relevant to their discussions. We don't have to be represented as such. So how would we feed into that?
I can just respond from the festival's point of view. We have absolutely no issue with SALs, or in fact, nor should we, because we haven't got any control on what it is they might want to say, and we'll probably be happy to get information that comes from in the Residents Association to by whatever vehicle to the safety advisory group for them to ask us questions about it. It's just the representation at the meeting that we.
This is at the core of a lot of what we've been discussing, which is how do we communicate? But anyway, I'm going to leave it to our learned friend here.
Okay, let's move on to item 16 on our agenda. Subcommittee members, any responsible authorities or other persons, questions and points of clarification. Mike. Item 17, the applicant and licence holder shall have the opportunity to put questions to those who have made representations, if permitted to do so by the subcommittee, or they may respond to the comments when summing up their case.
No questions.
18, we're moving very rapidly now. An opportunity should be given to all parties present to sum up their case, but not to add any new facts in the same order as above.
It helps, my learned friend. I don't propose to say anything if he doesn't.
I will sum up briefly. It doesn't help, but thank you. Much to one's horror.
Sorry to interrupt. As Rex, just because it's Cheryl Lamb, about got one point to make. I'm sure you'll cover it. It's about the presence of the Residents Association on the SAG. My interpretation is, of course, they can only impose a condition on this premises license. So it's something that this premises license holder's got to have control over. I can't see how legally a condition can be placed that would require this premises license holder to put the Residents Association on the SAG.
No,
it's not saying they've got control.
No, but it's.
I can see the value.
That's why I've got it to
the shadow SAG, if I can put it that way. Is that the purpose behind that? Is that recognising that? Yeah. Thank you.
That's why I asked questions about who hosts the SAG, who invites, and so on.
That's why I asked the same questions. Yeah.
Well, I promise my summing up is going to be very brief.
Well,
you can hold me to that. Well, paragraph 11.20 of the section 182 guidance says the purpose of review is to identify problems and to come up with a solution. In effect, you're like a doctor. You're saying, what's the problem? What's the remedy? What's the prescription? So when my learned friend says, don't be prescriptive, in fact, you're required to be prescriptive. What does that mean? It means writing conditions. What's the problem here? Well, we've already heard from the premises that they've made mistakes, they don't have enough people, and there are challenges and issues. We welcome those admissions of their failings. We also welcome their offer to improve and to do better, which of course they should be doing, because that's what the licensing is about. If you look at the concerns raised in the review, it really boils down to listen to our experience. We live there. We know what happens. We want our voice to be heard and then to be valued. And in order to do that, we do need an honest broker. And the discussion with my learning friend has been very helpful, because we hear what we hear about the SAG. The idea of putting it through a community meeting chaired by the council, where the council can take that information and use it effectively in a targeted way, because we've seen quite naturally the passions that residents have and the natural passions of the operator is, in my submission, quite legitimate. So I amend my request to you and say, fine, let the SAG remain with the expertise, so long as there is a condition brokered by the local authority that there will be these resident meetings as a minimum, one before and one after, at which the premises license holder must attend. And in fairness, if they get lucky and residents just give up, then there'll be nothing to it. So it won't be an onerous condition. And as a minimum, the traffic management plan and the environmental impacts are properly discussed and based on data, whether it's called the sustainable impact, the sustainability report or environmental impact assessment. I don't mind what it's called, as long as the content is about the impacts of the event. And it does seem to me that we are there, that they agree to engagement and participation. They agree that the traffic management needs improvement. They agree to marshalling. They agree to reviewing their conduct and reporting back on it. And they agree, or you ever want to call it, that the environmental impacts and the sustainability are presented. So it's been very helpful today because they've agreed to everything. What they're not agreeing to, and it's telling that they're not agreeing to, is that they don't want conditions. We don't want to be bound by anything. We don't want any obligation whatsoever. Just take our promises for it. And you can see why promises don't work when we saw the interaction between the operator and the residents. Promises don't work because neither party understands what they mean. You need the prescription and you need the condition in order to tie the parties down so everyone knows what's required of them. If they are genuinely committed to improvement, to working with the residents, they should have no fear of a prescription that is put in their operating schedule. I'm deeply concerned that they set their face towards this last area of agreement that is needed. I commend the review application to you. It represents a really useful way forward. Discussion clearly works, and it will clearly work in the future. See, I was brief. Thank you very much.
Premises license. Prior and after each event, the organiser will hold community liaison meetings to discuss the event with them.
Yes, we say that's broken down, so that's in our review. We say it's in there, but it just doesn't happen or hasn't happened. And so in order to ensure that that does happen, we're asking for, I went for the nuclear option, if you will, of the SAG involvement, but the community engagement meeting chaired by the local authority will ensure that does happen, will ensure that the operator is there and will give these residents, the parish council, and the Women's Institute or whomever, the opportunity to attend and share their experience.
I will be brief then in response. I do need to respond, but we aren't far away at all, and it's moved, of course, because Safety Advisory Group issue has been accepted. I think we need to be careful with language and saying that deeply concerned, and it's telling that, you know, that we're not accepting that. You've seen what we've submitted, discussed today. There's always going to be one element of area that's not going to be absolutely crystal clear, and there seems to be some discussion on that. And that was this situation at Ampton Redmond Lane. And there are my clients saying, "Oh, we know that we didn't get it right last year." So it's a matter for the committee what additional conditions that you need to impose, and you've heard what we've quite happy to agree to. And I hope you can see that as a proper partnership working approach from my clients. And just coming on to paragraph 11.20 of the guidance. The whole paragraph reads this: in deciding which the powers to invoke, expected licensing authorities should, so far as possible, seek to establish the causes of the concerns and the representations identified. Clear on that. The remedial action taken should generally be directed at these causes and should always be no more than an appropriate and proportionate response to address the causes of concern that instigated the review. So it's over to the committee now to decide what you feel is appropriate, what you feel is proportionate. We're not far away. It's just a matter of finalising the element of wording of the conditions. Always in licensing, I, as a representative for those who run premises licenses, need to be careful because of the enforceability powers available on licenses to ensure that it is something, A, that we can comply with, and B, that is enforceable.
Just to check with both my learned friends here, so we're absolutely clear on what's being asked for and what's in dispute.
Yeah.
So from what I understand, what I call it the white noise condition, that's been agreed, and we've got the wording down for that. And Mr. Chair, am I right in thinking that the remaining one is about the community engagement meeting?
Yeah, the community engagement meeting.
Yeah.
And then the traffic report.
Yeah.
And the review of that afterwards and the engagement. So as per the and the offer of the marshal.
Right. So what condition would you like the committee to involve? I'm just thinking about wording, just to make sure, and I'm not prejudging it.
No. So we have suggested, one, that there will be an annual survey of traffic impacts arising from the setup of the event itself, and the get out of the event.
Let's slow down just a little bit.
Yeah.
Start again.
Page 41.
If we work from that one.
Okay, is it written down that page?
Yes. The premises license holder will employ the services of a dedicated traffic management company to undertake an annual survey of traffic impacts arising from the setup of the event itself, and the get out of the event. That traffic management company must consult with local residents, businesses, and emergency services. There must be a traffic management plan, adherence to the plan throughout the period, and it must be completed and available to the residents no later than 3 months. So you've heard discussion about whether it can be 3 months or 2 months, or 1 month. So that's the wording for that. My learned friend has agreed, his email, that there will be a qualified member of Chevron staff. I don't think you should use the word Chevron, but a qualified member of staff present at the entrance to Remenham Lane at times during the festival to include the build and break period.
Yep.
And I think the premises license holder said that there'll be sufficient persons in a rota. And in my submissions, I suggested to you whether one would be enough or not. So I suggested 2, but it's a matter for you. And then I've requested, again, going back to page 41, an environmental impact assessment, an annual environmental impact assessment. And the discussion is, well, is it an environmental assessment? Could it be called the sustainability report? And again, we leave that to members to determine. In my submission, it should be annual. It should be available after the event, obviously, because that's how you'd assess the impact. And it must be in consultation, certainly as a minimum, with the local residents. But it may well be that members decide that that's tied into the minimum requirements of the community engagement.
What I heard also was in the community engagement is what you're asking there is for effectively, my note is premises licence holder must attend a community engagement order convened by the local authority to discuss as a minimum traffic management report and the environmental impact of the event. I put in including any sustainability report, and this is to be happening before the event.
And it may well be that that's the easier way of doing it for members. So that's the alternative, really. And that might build in some flexibility.
Yeah. Okay. All right. Thank you.
Yes, it's our turn to ask questions now.
Chair, can I just ask Mr. Cry just to respond to any of that in terms of the word?
Yes, just on the last point first. You might need to help me here on, we're dealing with each in turn. The last one, we don't have a problem with that as a condition. The requirement for the community engagement report controlled by the local authorities, etc., and to include the matters that you mentioned. The only thing that we don't have absolute control of at this present time is when the sustainability report is available. So if it's wide enough to say to discuss sustainability issues, then
environmental impact or sustainability issues.
Well, sustainability causing sustainability issues in relation to the environment, I think, would be the wording that we would prefer as a conditionality on that.
There's in terms of next steps, I read that the sustainability plan for 2023 needs to be signed off. There are monthly sustainable meetings. I agree. I think the impact of an event like this in the report should be, I think 3 months is probably fair. But then it does mean,
but I thought that, okay.
I think there needs to be something to discuss, doesn't there?
Yes, and that's why.
So it throws out the timetabling.
That is why sustainability and environmental issues will be discussed in the residents' group meeting. We don't need a separate condition. We have to supply a copy of the sustainability report.
I'd be asking for that report within 3 months. Otherwise, these things get done on the
Well, proportionality and appropriateness comes into play there.
Thinking about the environmental impacts.
Is it my
policy?
Is it my submissions now? I thought it was my.
Yeah, Leo.
I thought it was my response.
Answering the questions you raised.
Okay. The point about we've agreed white noise. We've agreed, of course, providing the ESMP and the traffic management plan. We've agreed the community meeting. The question of whether or not 2 members of staff are at the entrance to Remington Lane or 1, and you see that sort of really does demonstrate how straining it can be for a premises license holder if there's a requirement then for 2, and of course we only have 1 available at a particular moment in time, 2 prescriptive, and so that we would ask that is retained at 1, but we're happy for it to be a condition, and of course it shouldn't mention the company. This was just in the email, so it's a member of staff to be present, and this is cooperation, this is engagement, and it doesn't necessarily mean that everything else needs to be conditioned apart from those that we've agreed to. I think that covers the points.
Okay, now we're questions from the panel.
I actually have a question on legally on it. So this subcommittee thought there were a need to order conditions, not only of this licence, but also other licences for the same location. How does the committee vote?
No power of this subcommittee to do that, and the test is whether it's appropriate rather than the need. Whether it's appropriate, it's only about this particular licence.
So if it's any comfort, my clients are looking at all the other licences as well.
I want to add, I suspect that's probably the case.
Well, I don't know if that was a comfort, however.
Yes.
We're probably chipping away then at each of the premises.
So we're just filling in our diaries for the next meeting. Right?
Slightly too.
A few licenses there.
Slightly too.
We've asked all our questions. Is there anything new? Yeah.
No, there isn't. Thank you very much for answering my questions.
Thank you. Then we will now consider the application. and come back to you within 7 days.
It's 5 months.
5 days.
We can leave the building.
Thank you very much. You may breathe air.
Can I just thank the council on behalf of the Residents Association? Very constructive meeting. Thank you.
Yes, thank you to the committee.